She thought the frozen vault would be empty, but when Margaret Brennan turned that final lock 200 feet beneath Arctic ice, what she found wasn't just $295 million in lost treasures. It was proof that sometimes the people who betray you give you exactly what you need to become who you were always meant to be. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and coffee on the morning everything fell apart. Margaret Brennan stood at the stove in her modest Montana home, flipping pancakes while morning light spilled through lace curtains she'd sewn herself 42 years ago. She was 67 now, her hair more silver than brown, her hands marked by decades of grading papers and tending gardens. But her eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made her one of the most beloved teachers Ridgeway High School had ever known. Her husband Thomas shuffled in, 70 years old and moving a little slower these days, but still solid as the day she'd married him. He kissed the top of her head and poured himself coffee from the pot she'd started at 5:30, same as every morning for 4 decades. "Smells good," he said, settling into his chair at the table they'd bought at a yard sale in 1983. "Richard's coming by this afternoon," Margaret said, sliding pancakes onto his plate. "Said he has the quarterly statements from our investments." Thomas nodded, unfolding the newspaper. Their son Richard was 38, sharp-suited, always busy with his financial advising business in Billings. He'd been managing their retirement savings for the past 6 years. $380,000 accumulated penny by penny over lifetimes of teaching. Substitute days when they were sick, summer jobs, every tax return, every small inheritance from parents long gone. It was supposed to carry them through retirement, maybe let them finally see Paris like Margaret had always dreamed. "He's doing well by us," Thomas said. "Account's been growing steady." Margaret smiled, pouring batter into the pan. "We raised a good man." She had no idea that in less than 8 hours she would discover just how wrong she was. Richard arrived at 3 o'clock in a car that cost more than their house. Margaret noticed but didn't say anything. He was successful. They were proud. He hugged them both, his cologne expensive and sharp. "I can't stay long," he said, settling into the living room couch. "Big meeting in Bozeman at 6. "Of course, sweetheart," Margaret said, bringing him coffee he didn't drink. Richard pulled out his laptop and a folder. "So, the markets have been volatile, but your portfolio is solid. You're sitting at about $412,000 now." Thomas whistled low. "Up from last quarter? That's good news." "Yeah, well," Richard clicked through screens, "I've got you diversified. International bonds, some tech stocks, municipal funds. Conservative but growing." He talked for 20 minutes using words that sounded important. Margaret and Thomas nodded, trusting, grateful. When he left, Margaret stood at the window watching his taillights disappear down their gravel road. "We're lucky," she said softly. Thomas took her hand. "We are." The phone rang at 9:43 that night. Margaret was already in her nightgown, reading in bed. Thomas answered in the kitchen. She heard his voice change, sharp, confused, then afraid. She came downstairs to find him gripping the counter, face pale as winter. "What is it?" He held up a hand, listening. Then he hung up, hands trembling. "That was the bank. They're freezing our accounts." Margaret's stomach dropped. "What? Why?" "They said there's been suspicious activity, large withdrawals, failed transfers. They need us to come in first thing tomorrow morning." Neither of them slept. They arrived at Rocky Mountain Credit Union when the doors unlocked at 8. The manager, a woman named Patricia, who'd gone to school with Margaret, led them into a private office. Her face was grim. "I'm so sorry," Patricia said, sliding papers across the desk. "But your accounts show a series of unauthorized transactions over the past 18 months. Money moved to offshore accounts, fake investment vehicles. The total loss is $378,000. The room tilted. Margaret gripped Thomas's hand so hard her knuckles went white. That's impossible, Thomas said. Our son manages our accounts. He just showed us statements last night. We're at 412,000. Patricia's expression softened with pity. Mr. Brennan, your actual balance is negative $4,200. The statements you were shown were fabricated. I'm sorry, but it appears your son has been embezzling your retirement funds. Margaret made a sound she didn't recognize, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. The next 3 days blurred together like a nightmare painted in shades of grey. They tried calling Richard. His phone was disconnected. They drove to his office in Billings. It was empty, lease terminated. They filed a police report. The detective was kind but blunt. International wire fraud is federal, and if he's already out of the country, recovery is unlikely. I'm sorry. Their lawyer, a man named Donald Harper who'd handled their wills, reviewed everything. He sat across from them in his oak-paneled office and delivered the verdict with professional sympathy that felt hollow. The transfers were technically authorized. You gave him power of attorney over your financial accounts. Legally, you consented to his management. Proving criminal intent will be difficult, especially if he's fled jurisdiction. He's our son, Margaret whispered. We trusted him. I know, Donald said, and I'm deeply sorry, but the reality is your money is gone. Transferred through shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, then moved again to accounts we can't trace. Even if we could locate Richard and prosecute, the funds have been laundered beyond recovery. Thomas stared at his hands, carpenter's hands, teacher's hands, honest hands that had built decks and graded essays and never taken a thing that wasn't earned. What do we do? He asked. Donald hesitated. You could try to negotiate with the bank on the overdraft. Apply for Social Security early, though the penalties will reduce your monthly income significantly. Sell the house, maybe. Downsize. Margaret stood abruptly. I need air. Outside, she leaned against Thomas's truck and let herself cry for the first time. Not quiet tears. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place she didn't know existed. 40 years of work. Every sacrifice. Every saved dollar. Gone. Stolen by the boy she'd rocked to sleep. The child she'd taught to ride a bike. The young man she'd helped through college. Thomas held her and said nothing because there was nothing to say. The foreclosure notice arrived 16 days later. The bank was calling in the overdraft and the home equity line they'd used years ago to replace the roof. They had 90 days. The town rallied. Former students organized a fundraiser. The teachers' union started a collection. People brought casseroles and hugs and kind words. It helped. God, it helped to know they were loved. But it wasn't enough. They raised $11,000. Nowhere near the $83,000 they owed. Margaret stopped sleeping. She'd lie awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, wondering where she'd failed as a mother. What had she done wrong? How had she raised someone capable of such cruelty? Thomas grew quieter. He'd go out to his workshop and stand among his tools, not building anything, just standing. They were breaking in slow motion. It was week 7 of the 90-day countdown when the letter arrived. Thick, cream-colored envelope, Canadian postage, addressed to Thomas Brennan in careful script. Thomas opened it at the kitchen table while Margaret made tea. Neither of them would drink. Inside was a letter from a law firm in Winnipeg. Thomas read it twice before speaking. It's from a lawyer, about my Uncle Magnus. Margaret looked up. Magnus? I didn't know you had an Uncle Magnus. My father's brother. I met him maybe twice when I was a kid. He moved to Canada in the 60s, worked for the government, I think, research or something. We lost touch. What does the letter say? Thomas scanned the page. He died 3 months ago. He was 91, and he left me something. Margaret's heart jumped. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the miracle. Money? Thomas shook his head slowly. Property. An Arctic research station in northern Canada, Nunavut territory. The hope died as quickly as it had sparked. A research station? Says here it's been abandoned since the late 80s. Sits on 43 acres about 800 miles north of Winnipeg. The lawyer says it's fully paid for. No taxes in that territory, but it's remote. No road access. Needs significant repairs. Thomas looked up. He's asking if we want to accept the inheritance or disclaim it. Margaret sat down heavily. An abandoned building in the Arctic. That's what we get. They called the lawyer the next day. A man named Pierre Duchamp, with a French accent and efficient manner. The facility is substantial, he explained. Your uncle worked there for nearly 30 years as a climatologist. When the government program shut down, he purchased the station and continued living there privately. It's built to Cold War specifications, concrete and steel construction, geothermal heating systems. Quite remarkable, really. But it's worthless, Thomas said. Pierre paused. In monetary terms, yes. The location makes it nearly impossible to sell. But structurally, it's sound. Your uncle maintained it meticulously until his health failed. Why would he leave this to me? His letter says you were the only family member who ever wrote to him. You sent a Christmas card every year. Thomas blinked. Margaret stared at him. I did, Thomas said slowly. Started when I was 12. My mother made me. I just kept doing it, even after she died. Your uncle never forgot, Pierre said. The property is yours if you want it. No strings. I just need your decision. That night, Margaret and Thomas sat at their kitchen table, surrounded by bills they couldn't pay and foreclosure notices they couldn't fight. We could go there, Margaret said suddenly. Thomas looked at her like she'd lost her mind. To the Arctic? Why not? We have nothing left here except debt and shame. The house is gone in 43 days anyway. What if we just left? Margaret, we're 67 and 70 years old. We can't survive in the Arctic. We survived teaching middle school for 40 years, she said, and despite everything, they both laughed. Thomas, what do we have to lose? We stay here, we're homeless, we lose our dignity. People will pity us forever. Or we go north. We take the one thing we have left and we make something of it. We don't even know what's there. Margaret's eyes hardened with something Thomas hadn't seen in weeks. Determination. Exactly. Maybe that's the point. Maybe we need to not know. Maybe we need to just trust that there's something better than this waiting for us. Thomas studied his wife's face. The woman who'd stood beside him through student loans and miscarriages and his father's long death. The woman who could recite Shakespeare and fix a carburetor and make a classroom of 30 teenagers actually care about history. You're serious? I've never been more serious about anything in my life. We can't stay here and watch everything we built turn to ash. I won't. 3 days later, they accepted the inheritance. 2 weeks after that, they held a yard sale that broke their hearts. Furniture they'd refinished together, books they'd collected, the dining room table where Richard had done his homework. All of it gone for dollars and quarters while neighbors shook their heads in sympathy. They packed what fit in Thomas's truck: clothes, tools, photographs, Margaret's grandmother's quilt, Thomas's father's watch, the essentials of a life reduced to what could be carried. Their last night in the house, they walked through empty rooms that echoed. Margaret stood in Richard's old bedroom, now just bare walls and carpet stains. She thought about the little boy who'd slept there, the teenager who'd dreamed there, the man who'd betrayed them. I keep thinking he'll call, she said, that he'll say it was a mistake or a misunderstanding or something. Thomas put his arm around her. He won't. How did we not see it? Because we loved him, and love makes you blind to things you don't want to see. Margaret leaned into her husband. Are we crazy, going north like this? Probably, but we're doing it together. They locked the door for the last time at dawn and drove away without looking back. The drive north took 6 days, through Montana into Alberta, then northeast through Saskatchewan, the landscape growing flatter, emptier, colder. They stayed in cheap motels and ate gas station sandwiches and barely spoke because there was too much to say and no words big enough to hold it all. At Thompson, Manitoba, they met the bush pilot Pierre had arranged. His name was Jack, 60-something, face weathered by wind and sun, eyes that had seen everything and judged nothing. "You folks know what you're getting into?" he asked, loading their belongings into his de Havilland Otter. "No," Margaret said honestly, "but we're going anyway." Jack grunted approval. "Good answer. People who think they know the North are usually the first ones it kills." The flight took 4 hours. Thomas sat co-pilot, Margaret in back, watching the world below transform from forest to tundra to ice. Endless white broken by black stone and frozen rivers that looked like veins across pale skin. "There," Jack said, pointing. Ahead, rising from the permafrost like a concrete temple, sat the station. It was massive, 3 stories of brutalist architecture half buried in snow and ice. Satellite dishes and weather instruments crowned the roof. A landing pad marked with faded orange paint sat 100 yards from the main entrance. Jack circled once, checking conditions, then brought them down with the ease of someone who'd made this landing 1,000 times. They stepped out into cold so fierce it stole Margaret's breath. The wind cut through her parka like it wasn't there. The sun sat low on the horizon, pale and distant. "It's 20 below today," Jack said, unloading boxes. "That's warm for October. You've got maybe 5 weeks before the real winter hits. After that, you're stuck here until April. Radio's in the supply shed. Call me if you need evac, but understand, if a storm hits, you could be waiting days." He showed them the basics: generator room, fuel depot, emergency supplies cached in the outer building. Then he handed Thomas a key ring that looked like it belonged to a prison warden. "Your uncle was particular about locks," Jack said. "Every door's got one. He labeled them all." Margaret looked up at the facility. It was uglier than anything she'd ever seen. Cold, brutal, unforgiving. It was perfect. "We'll be fine," she said. Jack studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Yeah, I believe you will be." They watched his plane take off, the engine roar fading until there was nothing but wind and silence so complete it had weight. Thomas and Margaret stood alone at the top of the world with nothing but each other and a building full of mysteries. "Well," Thomas said, "let's see what Uncle Magnus left us." The outer door opened with a groan of metal that hadn't moved in months. Inside, darkness swallowed them until Thomas found the light switches. Fluorescent tubes flickered to life, revealing a corridor that looked like it belonged in a Cold War bunker. Concrete walls, steel doors, everything painted in shades of institutional green and grey. But it was clean, no ice inside, no water damage. The air was cold but dry. "The geothermal heating," Thomas said, reading a placard on the wall, "keeps it above freezing year-round." They explored slowly, methodically. Living quarters on the 2nd floor, 4 bedrooms, each Spartan but functional. A kitchen with appliances from the 80s that still worked. A common area with bookshelves full of scientific journals and dog-eared paperbacks. Magnus's room was easy to identify. Personal photos on the desk, a journal left open. Margaret picked it up carefully, reading the last entry. February 9th, 2023. My hands shake too much to write clearly now. I know my time is short. I've arranged for Thomas to inherit this place. Of all my family, he was the only one who remembered I existed. Christmas cards for 56 years. He never forgot. I hope he finds what I've left for him. I hope he understands why I kept it secret. Some things are too important to trust to the world that abandoned them. The vault is his now. The key is in my chess set, Knight's base. Tell him to do what's right. I couldn't find them all. Maybe he can. Margaret read it 3 times. "What vault?" Thomas shook his head. "I have no idea." They spent the rest of the day making the place livable. Thomas got the generator running smoothly. Margaret unpacked their clothes into drawers that smelled like cedar and thyme. They heated soup from the extensive supply cache and ate in the kitchen while wind howled outside. That night, lying in a bed that wasn't theirs in a place that felt like another planet, Margaret spoke into the darkness. "Do you think Richard knows we're gone?" "I don't know." "Do you think he cares?" Thomas was quiet for a long time. "I don't think the person who stole our money was really our son. Not the boy we knew. Somewhere along the way, he became someone else." Margaret felt tears slip down her temples into her hair. "I miss who he used to be." "So do I." They lay in silence, listening to the Arctic night, mourning not just their money but something far more precious. The loss of a child who'd never actually died. 3 days passed. They fell into routine. Thomas worked on repairs, fixing seals, checking systems. Margaret organized, catalogued, explored. The station was like a maze. Corridors led to labs full of scientific equipment she didn't understand. Storage rooms packed with supplies. A garage housing 2 snowmobiles and a tracked vehicle that looked military. On the 4th day, Margaret was sorting through Magnus's belongings when she found the chess set. Beautiful carved walnut pieces, the board inlaid with maple and mahogany. She picked up the white knight, admiring the craftsmanship. The base twisted. Inside the hollow piece, wrapped in cloth, was a key, small, brass, stamped with numbers, 0702. "Thomas!" she called. He came running. They stared at the key together. "The journal mentioned this," Margaret said. "The vault. He said the key was in the knight's base. But where's the vault?" They searched for 2 more days. Every door, every panel, every locked cabinet. Nothing matched the key. Nothing revealed anything unusual. It was Thomas who finally found it. He was in the lower level, checking the foundation in what appeared to be a storage area for ice core samples. He noticed the wall didn't sit quite right. A seam, almost invisible, running floor to ceiling. He pressed, nothing. He pushed harder, still nothing. Then he saw it. A small slot, barely visible, numbered 0702. His hands shook as he inserted the key. It turned smoothly. Somewhere deep in the wall, mechanisms engaged. Hydraulics hissed. The seam widened. A door, not opened from the outside but from within. It swung inward, revealing an elevator shaft descending into darkness. "Margaret!" His voice echoed through the facility. She came at a run, breathless. They stood together at the threshold, looking down. "He built a vault," Thomas whispered. "Uncle Magnus built a vault under the ice." A control panel beside the elevator showed 3 buttons: up, down, emergency stop. Thomas pressed down. The elevator lurched to life, descending slowly, smoothly. Margaret gripped his hand. Neither of them spoke. The shaft was carved through permafrost and bedrock, the walls glistening with ice. After what felt like forever, the elevator stopped. The doors opened, motion sensors triggered, lights flickered on row by row, revealing what lay beneath. Margaret made a sound that was half gasp, half prayer. They stood at the entrance to a cavern the size of a cathedral, carved from ice and rock, temperature-controlled, meticulously organized, and filling every inch of available space were crates, containers, climate-controlled cases, treasures, hundreds of them, thousands. Thomas stepped forward like a man in a dream. The first case he opened held a painting, oil on canvas, a landscape he didn't recognize but knew was valuable from the frame alone. The card beside it read, "Italian Renaissance, circa 1520, stored March 1976, client deceased 1994, no heirs located." The next case held jewelry, diamonds and emeralds that caught the light like captured stars. Another, rare books, first editions, manuscripts in protective sleeves. Another, gold bars stamped with Swiss bank codes. Margaret moved through the rows, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. Each item labeled, each one catalogued, each one with a story of who left it, when, why. In the center of the vault sat a desk. On it, a leather journal. Margaret opened it with trembling hands. Magnus's handwriting filled the pages, neat, precise, explaining everything. I was recruited in 1968 to oversee a preservation project. During the Cold War, when nuclear annihilation seemed inevitable, wealthy individuals and governments needed somewhere to hide the things they couldn't bear to lose: art, artifacts, wealth. I provided that service. This facility was the vault. I was the guardian. When the Cold War ended and the threat diminished, some clients retrieved their items. But many died. Records were lost, governments changed, corporations dissolved, and I was left with a collection of the world's treasures with no one to return them to. I spent 30 years trying to locate rightful owners. I found some. Many I couldn't. The items remain here, protected, preserved, waiting. The estimated value of this collection is $295 million, but its true worth cannot be measured in money. These are pieces of human history, of artistry and achievement, of families' legacies. Whoever inherits this vault inherits a responsibility, not to wealth but to justice. Find the rightful owners. Return what can be returned. Protect what must be protected. Do what I could not finish. Margaret looked up at Thomas, tears streaming down her face. $295 million, she whispered. But Thomas wasn't looking at the treasure. He was looking at her. He's giving us a purpose, Thomas said quietly. Not money, a mission. In that moment, standing 200 feet beneath Arctic ice, surrounded by the lost treasures of the world, Margaret Brennan understood something profound. Their son had stolen their money, their security, their peace. He'd taken everything they'd worked for and left them with nothing but betrayal and pain. But in doing so, he'd driven them to this place, to this moment, to this impossible responsibility that suddenly made every hardship they'd endured feel like preparation rather than punishment. "What do we do?" Margaret asked. Thomas took her hand, the same hand he'd held for 42 years, through wedding vows and hospital rooms and parent-teacher conferences, and now this impossible gift wrapped in their greatest loss. "We do what we've always done," he said. "We show up, we work hard, and we try to make things right." Outside, the Arctic wind screamed against concrete walls that had stood for 50 years and would stand for 50 more. Inside the vault, an elderly couple stood among treasures they'd never sought, carrying a burden they hadn't chosen, beginning a journey they couldn't imagine. Their son had betrayed them. The world had broken them. But somehow, in the coldest place on earth, Margaret and Thomas Brennan had found exactly what they needed. Not wealth, not revenge, but purpose. And sometimes that's the greatest treasure of all. The first morning after discovering the vault, Margaret woke before dawn to find Thomas already gone from bed. She pulled on her warmest clothes and found him in the kitchen. Magnus's journals spread across the table like a paper city, a pot of coffee already half empty beside him. "How long have you been up?" she asked. "Since 3. Couldn't sleep." He looked up, eyes red but alert. "Margaret, do you understand what we have down there?" She poured herself coffee and sat across from him. $295 million worth of other people's property. Not just property. Look at this. He slid a journal entry toward her. 1978. A Jewish family fleeing Argentina's military dictatorship. They gave Magnus their grandmother's diamond necklace, the only thing they'd saved from the Holocaust. They were supposed to come back for it once they settled in Israel. What happened? Their plane crashed, all 4 of them. Magnus spent years trying to find surviving family. Couldn't locate anyone. Thomas flipped pages. Here, 1981. A Russian scientist defecting with his daughter. He left documents, research, things he'd stolen from Soviet labs, planned to sell them to start a new life in Canada. And? Disappeared. Magnus thinks the KGB found them. Thomas's voice was hollow. Every item down there has a story like this. People running, people hiding, people trusting Magnus to keep safe what they couldn't carry, and most of them never came back. Margaret felt the weight of it settling on her shoulders. So what do we do? What Magnus asked. We find who these things belong to. We try to make it right. They spent that entire day in the vault, just reading. Magnus had documented everything with obsessive precision. Each item had a file, provenance records, photographs, notes about the client, attempts he'd made to locate them. Some files were thick with correspondence and research, others heartbreakingly thin. A name, a date, nothing more. Margaret picked up a file labeled simply Anastasia, 1976. Inside was a photograph of a young woman, maybe 20, holding a small boy. Behind them, a palatial home. Attached was a velvet pouch containing a brooch shaped like a butterfly, encrusted with sapphires and diamonds. The note read, Anastasia Petrov, fled Tehran during revolution, left this for safekeeping, promised to return within 6 months, never heard from again, no record of survival, brooch estimated value, $470,000, belongs to son Dmitri if he can be found, would be approximately 49 years old now. Thomas, Margaret called softly. We could find him. This Dmitri. The internet exists now. Social media. We could actually do what Magnus couldn't. Thomas came over, read the file. We could, if he's alive, if he even knows this exists. But we could try. Something shifted in Thomas's expression. The same look he used to get when a particularly difficult student finally understood a concept. Purpose. Direction. Hope. We could try, he agreed. They established a routine over the next week. Mornings in the vault, cataloguing and photographing. Afternoons maintaining the facility because the Arctic didn't care about their mission. Ice still needed to be cleared. Generators still needed fuel. Food still needed cooking. Evenings, they'd research on the satellite internet connection, slow and expensive but functional. The facility itself revealed its secrets gradually. Margaret found Magnus's living patterns in the wear of the floorboards. His favorite chair in the common room, seat cushion compressed from decades of use. His coffee mug in the kitchen, still sitting in the dish rack. He'd lived here alone for 30 years, guardian of treasures he couldn't claim, keeper of secrets he couldn't share. Why didn't he tell anyone? Margaret wondered aloud one night. They were in Magnus's study, surrounded by his personal effects. Photographs of a younger Magnus in a government lab coat, commendations from various agencies, and pictures of family, including one of young Thomas, maybe 12 years old, serious-faced and skinny. I think he was afraid, Thomas said. Look at some of these files. The people who left things here, some were running from governments, from criminals, from powerful organizations. If word got out about this vault, what do you think would have happened? People would have come for it. Not people. Wolves. The kind who don't care about rightful ownership or doing what's right. They'd have killed Magnus and looted everything. Margaret shivered despite the geothermal heat. So he kept it secret, died alone rather than risk it. He kept it safe. There's a difference. On day 9, Margaret made the first breakthrough. She was researching the Petrov file, trying variations of names and dates. After 4 hours of dead ends, she found him. Dmitri Petrov, age 47, living in Toronto, working as an engineer. His LinkedIn profile showed a professional photo. He had his mother's eyes. Her hands shook as she showed Thomas. It's him. It has to be. How do we know for sure? Margaret pointed to Dmitri's profile. Under languages, he'd listed Farsi and Russian. Under interests, preserving Iranian cultural heritage lost during the '79 revolution. He knows, Margaret whispered. He knows something was lost. He's been looking in his own way. Thomas sat down heavily. So we contact him. And say what? Hello, stranger. Your mother left a priceless brooch with my uncle 50 years ago, and we found it in an underground vault in the Arctic. He'll think we're scammers. Or worse, They sat in silence, the magnitude of their task becoming clear. It wasn't enough to find the rightful owners. They had to convince them, prove authenticity, navigate international laws and inheritance rights and questions they didn't even know to ask yet. "We need help," Margaret said finally. "We can't do this alone." Who do we trust? That was the question that kept them up at night. Their own son had betrayed them. Their lawyer had leaked information. Who in this world could they trust with the location of $295 million in lost treasure? What happens next will turn their isolation into a lifeline, reveal allies they never expected, and prove that sometimes the people you can trust most are the ones who have nothing to gain. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Margaret decided to start small, cautious. She drafted an email to Dmitry Petrov that she rewrote 17 times. The final version was simple. "Dear Mr. Petrov, my name is Margaret Brennan. My late uncle-in-law, Magnus Brennan, worked as a preservation specialist in the 1970s and 80s. While settling his estate, we discovered records indicating your mother, Anastasia Petrov, may have left an item in his care in 1976. If you are the son of Anastasia Petrov, formerly of Tehran, please contact me. I believe I have something that belongs to you." She included a phone number to the station's satellite line and her email. No details, no mention of value, no location. "You think he'll respond?" Thomas asked. "If it were me and someone said they had something of my mother's, I'd respond." She hit send and felt her stomach clench. The first step into visibility, the first crack in their secrecy. The response came 18 hours later. "Mrs. Brennan, my mother was Anastasia Petrov. She fled Iran with me in January of 1979 when I was 3 years old. She died in 1988. I never knew what happened to her jewelry. She used to tell me stories about a butterfly brooch her grandmother gave her. Is this what you have? Please, if this is real, I need to know. Dmitry Petrov." Margaret read it aloud to Thomas, her voice breaking on the last line. "He needs to know," she repeated. "Thomas, his mother died 36 years ago. He's been carrying that loss his whole life." "So we tell him?" Margaret thought about her own son, about the grief of losing someone who was still alive, about the desperate human need to hold on to something, anything, that connected you to the people you'd loved and lost. "We tell him," she said, "but carefully." The phone call happened 2 days later. Margaret's hands trembled as she dialed. Dmitry answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Brennan?" "Mr. Petrov, thank you for speaking with me." His voice was educated, careful, hopeful in a way that hurt to hear. "Is it real? Do you really have my mother's brooch?" "I believe so. Can you describe it?" "A butterfly, sapphires for the wings, diamonds for the body. My grandmother had it made in 1938. My mother wore it the day she married my father." He paused. "Mrs. Brennan, where did you find this? How?" Margaret had prepared for this. She and Thomas had discussed how much to reveal. They'd decided on the truth, mostly. "My husband's uncle ran a private storage facility for valuable items during the Cold War. People who were fleeing dangerous situations would leave things with him for safekeeping. Your mother was one of his clients. She left the brooch in January of 79. His records indicate she planned to return for it within 6 months. Silence on the other end, then a sound that might have been a sob. "She never made it back to get it," Dmitry said finally. "We lived in a refugee center in Pakistan for 2 years. By the time we got to Canada, she was sick. Cancer. She died when I was 11. I'm so sorry. She used to tell me stories about Tehran, about the house we lived in, the garden, the parties my father threw, and this brooch. She'd describe it in such detail I could see it. But I thought it was gone, lost when we fled. I never knew she'd managed to save it." Margaret felt tears sliding down her face. "She saved it for you? She wanted you to have it. Can I see it? Proof it's real? Of course. Margaret had prepared photos. She emailed them while they stayed on the phone, heard his intake of breath when the images loaded. That's it, he whispered. That's exactly it. The detail on the wings, the clasp, everything. It's yours, Dmitri. We'd like to return it to you. Another long pause. Mrs. Brennan, something this valuable. How do I know this isn't a scam? That you're not going to ask me for money or try to steal my identity or something? Margaret appreciated his caution. It was smart. You don't know, and I understand your hesitation. So here's what I propose. Give me the name of a lawyer you trust, someone in Toronto. We'll send the brooch to them with all documentation. They can verify authenticity. Once you're satisfied it's real and legally yours, you can retrieve it. We ask nothing in return. Nothing? Nothing. This belongs to you. Your mother left it for you. We're just the messengers. Dmitri was quiet for so long Margaret thought the connection had dropped. Then he said, "Why are you doing this?" Margaret looked at Thomas, who was listening on speaker, eyes wet. She thought about their son, about trust broken and faith lost, about the choice between bitterness and purpose. "Because it's the right thing to do," she said simply, "and because your mother trusted someone to keep this safe. We're honoring that trust." 2 weeks later, they packaged the butterfly brooch with Magnus's documentation and their own notarized statements. They sent it via insured courier to the law firm Dmitri had named. The cost was $800 they could barely afford, but Margaret didn't hesitate. "One down," Thomas said, as they watched the courier's helicopter lift off. "How many to go?" Margaret checked her master list. 347 items, 212 with enough information to potentially trace, 135 with almost nothing. "We're going to need help." That night, Margaret sat down and wrote another email. This one to Dr. Sarah Chen, a name she'd found while researching art recovery. Dr. Chen worked with the Art Loss Register, an international database of stolen and missing art. She'd helped recover pieces from World War II, from museum thefts, from estate disputes. Her credentials were impeccable, her reputation beyond reproach. Margaret's email was brief. "Dr. Chen, my name is Margaret Brennan. I have information about a significant number of potentially lost or stolen artworks and artifacts from the 1970s and 80s. The collection includes pieces from various countries and conflicts. I'm looking for guidance on proper recovery and return procedures. Would you be willing to consult?" She sent it at 11 p.m., expecting no response for days. Dr. Chen replied at 6 a.m. "Mrs. Brennan, I'm very interested. Can you tell me more about the nature and scope of this collection? Also, where are you located? Dr. Sarah Chen." Margaret showed Thomas the response over breakfast. "Do we tell her?" Thomas asked. "We have to tell someone eventually. We can't verify 300 items on our own. We don't have the expertise. And if we make mistakes, we could hurt the very people we're trying to help." Thomas nodded slowly. "Okay, but not everything. Not the location. Not yet." Margaret drafted a careful response. "Dr. Chen, the collection consists of approximately 200 verifiable items, including paintings, sculptures, jewelry, documents, and precious metals. They were placed in secure storage between 1968 and 1987 by individuals fleeing various conflicts and political situations. The original custodian has passed away, and I've inherited the responsibility of returning items to rightful owners or heirs. I'm located in a remote area and would need to handle this carefully for security reasons. Are you able to work remotely?" The response came within an hour. "Mrs. Brennan, what you're describing could be one of the most significant recovery projects in recent history. Yes, I can work remotely, though I'd eventually need to verify authenticity in person. Can you send me a preliminary inventory? Even basic descriptions would help me assess scope." Margaret spent the next 3 days compiling a list. Item numbers, categories, dates, countries of origin. No values, no specific locations, nothing that could lead someone to the vault. When she sent it, she held her breath. Dr. Chen's response came the next morning, and it was not an email. It was a video call request. Margaret and Thomas looked at each other. This was it. The moment they stepped from complete secrecy into partial trust. Thomas positioned their laptop so the background showed only a neutral wall. No windows, no identifying features. Margaret accepted the call. Dr. Sarah Chen appeared on screen. Asian woman, mid-40s, wearing glasses and a professional blazer, sitting in what looked like a university office. Her expression was intense but kind. "Mrs. Brennan, Mr. Brennan, thank you for taking my call." "Dr. Chen," Margaret said, hearing the nervousness in her own voice, "I've reviewed your preliminary inventory. If this is accurate, you have items that museums, governments, and families have been searching for, in some cases, for 50 years. "We know," Thomas said. "That's why we need help." Dr. Chen leaned forward. "I need to ask you some direct questions. Is this collection legally obtained?" "Yes," Margaret said. "My husband's uncle was hired to provide secure storage. People paid him to keep items safe. It was a legitimate business." "And the items weren't claimed because?" "Many of the clients died. Records were lost, wars ended, governments changed. Our uncle spent 30 years trying to locate people. He found some, many he couldn't. Now he's passed, and we have what remains." Dr. Chen studied them through the screen. "Where is this collection located?" "We can't tell you that yet," Margaret said firmly. "I'm sorry, but we need to establish trust first." To her credit, Dr. Chen nodded. "I understand. Given the value involved, that's smart. Okay, here's what I can offer. I'll help you verify items, trace ownership, navigate international recovery laws. I won't charge you. This kind of work, returning lost heritage, it's why I do what I do. But I need full transparency about provenance, and eventually I'll need physical access to verify authenticity." "Eventually," Thomas said, "but not yet." "Fair enough. Let's start with the pieces you have the most information about. Send me files. I'll begin research." Over the next month, they fell into a partnership. Margaret would send files, Dr. Chen would research, they'd discuss findings over video calls. Slowly, carefully, they made progress. The second return was a painting, a small Renaissance piece that had belonged to an Italian family fleeing political persecution in 1974. Dr. Chen traced the family to their descendants in Milan. When they received the painting, they sent a video. 3 generations crying, touching the canvas their great-grandfather had saved. The grandmother said, "We thought this was lost forever, burned in the riots. You've given us back a piece of our history." The third was a collection of Vietnamese documents, a historian's life work smuggled out of Saigon in 75. His daughter, now a professor in California, wept on the phone. "My father died thinking his research was destroyed. To know it survived, that someone cared enough to keep it safe, it means everything." Each return broke Margaret's heart and healed it simultaneously. This work, this purpose, it was filling a space in her soul she hadn't known was empty. But then came the call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Margaret was cataloguing jewelry when the satellite phone rang. She almost didn't answer. They got few calls, mostly check-ins from Jack the pilot. "Hello?" "Margaret, it's Donald Harper, your lawyer." Margaret's blood went cold. She hadn't spoken to Donald since they'd left Montana, hadn't told him where they'd gone. "Donald, what do you want?" "I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Your cell's disconnected. I had to do some digging to find this number." "How did you find it?" "You filed a change of address with the post office, forwarding to Nunavut territory. Wasn't hard to trace from there." He paused. "Margaret, I'm calling because there's been movement on Richard's case. Her heart lurched. What kind of movement? Interpol located him. He's in Singapore. The RCMP is coordinating extradition. There might be a possibility of recovering some funds. Margaret should have felt relief, vindication. Instead, she felt dread. That's good news, she said carefully. It is. But Margaret, there's something else. Richard's lawyer contacted me. He's claiming you and Thomas have come into significant assets. He's threatening to file a claim against any recovery or inheritance. Says as your son, he has rights. Margaret gripped the phone. That's absurd. We have nothing. Do you, though? Because I've been hearing rumors about a satellite internet account registered to your name, expensive data usage, international shipping, and a rather large payment to a courier service in Toronto. Margaret's mouth went dry. We sent a personal item to a friend, that's all. Margaret. Donald's tone shifted, concerned, almost fatherly. If you've come into money or property, you need proper legal protection. Richard's lawyer is sharp. If there's anything to find, he'll find it. There's nothing to find. Then you won't mind if I come up and verify that, help you establish a paper trail showing no significant assets. It would actually help your case against Richard. Margaret looked at Thomas, who'd been listening, his face pale. I appreciate the offer, Donald, but we're fine. We don't need visitors. Margaret, I'm trying to help you. If Richard's people dig and find something you haven't properly documented, it could complicate everything. At minimum, let me review your situation remotely. I said no, thank you for calling. She hung up before he could respond. Thomas stared at her. He knows. He doesn't know. He suspects. Same thing. Margaret, if he's curious, others will be. And if Richard's lawyer starts digging into our financial activity, the data trail from our research, the shipping, the satellite costs, it doesn't prove anything. It proves something changed, that we went from broke to spending money we shouldn't have. Margaret felt panic rising. They'd been so careful about the items, but they hadn't thought about the operational costs. Every email, every phone call, every package shipped, it all left traces. What do we do? She asked. Thomas walked to the window, staring out at the endless white. We need better help. Legal help. Someone who specializes in this kind of thing. We can't afford lawyers. We can't afford not to have them. He turned back to her. Margaret, we have $295 million in assets that aren't legally ours. We're trying to return them. But if someone challenges that, claims we're stealing or hiding assets, we could lose everything, including the ability to finish what we started. That night, Margaret called Dr. Chen on their scheduled video conference, but this time Thomas was beside her and their expressions were serious. Dr. Chen, we need to talk about protection, legal protection. Dr. Chen set down her tea. What happened? Margaret explained. The lawyer, the questions, Richard's threats through his attorney. Dr. Chen listened without interrupting. Then she said, You need to establish a trust, immediately. A legal entity that holds the collection separate from your personal assets. It protects you and ensures the items are used only for their intended purpose, returned to rightful owners. We don't know how to do that. I do. Or rather, I know people who do. There's a law firm in Ottawa that specializes in cultural property and repatriation. They've handled cases involving Nazi-looted art, indigenous artifacts, estate disputes. They're discreet and ethical. Would you like me to make an introduction? Margaret looked at Thomas. They'd spent 6 weeks building trust with Dr. Chen. She'd helped return 3 items already. She'd asked for nothing, delivered everything she'd promised. Yes, Margaret said, please. 2 days later, they were on a video call with attorney James Morrison, late 50s, grey beard, kind eyes magnified by thick glasses. Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, Dr. Chen has briefed me on your situation. I want to start by saying what you're attempting is both admirable and legally complex, but it's absolutely doable with the right structure. What do we need to do? Thomas asked. Establish a charitable trust. You'll be co-trustees. The trust's purpose is the preservation and repatriation of cultural property and personal effects to verified rightful owners. This removes the collection from your personal estate. It can't be claimed by creditors. It can't be touched by your son's legal actions, and it establishes clear legal basis for your work. How long does that take? I can have documents ready in 72 hours, but I'll need full disclosure, complete inventory, location of the collection, provenance records, everything. This was it, the moment of true trust, revealing everything to people they'd known for days or weeks, betting their entire mission on the belief that there were still good people in the world who cared about doing right. Margaret thought about Magnus, alone in the Arctic for 30 years because he couldn't trust anyone, dying without finishing his mission. She thought about Dmitry Petrov, holding his mother's butterfly brooch, crying tears of gratitude. She thought about her son, who'd taken everything because he could, and she made a choice. The collection is located in Nunavut territory, in a facility built during the Cold War. It's underground, climate-controlled, secured. We're living on site. The inventory is 347 items, estimated total value $295 million. James Morrison didn't even blink. All right, send me everything. I'll get started. After the call ended, Thomas put his arm around Margaret. You think we did the right thing? I think we did the only thing, she said. Magnus tried to do this alone. It killed him. We're not dying alone in the ice, Thomas. We're finishing this, together, and with help. That night, for the first time since discovering the vault, Margaret slept soundly. The secret was out, not to the world, but to people who could help them protect it, people who understood what was at stake. The next morning, she woke to find an email from Dmitry Petrov. The subject line was simply, "Thank you." Inside was a photograph. Dmitry, his wife, his 3 children, all gathered around the butterfly brooch, now mounted in a shadow box on their wall. The email read, "My children are learning their history, their great-grandmother's courage, my mother's sacrifice, your uncle's integrity, and your kindness. This is more than a brooch. It's proof that some people keep their promises even 50 years later. Thank you for giving my family back a piece of ourselves. We won't forget this, ever." Margaret showed Thomas. They stood together in the Arctic morning light, reading the words over and over. 344 to go, Thomas said softly. 344 chances to do this, Margaret replied, to give people back pieces of themselves. She thought about her son, about the hole his betrayal had torn in her heart, and she realized something profound. That wound was still there. It probably always would be. But it wasn't bleeding anymore, because purpose was better than pain. Healing others helped heal yourself, and sometimes the greatest treasure you find is the strength to keep going when everything says stop. Outside, the Arctic wind sang its ancient song. Inside the vault, treasures waited in silence. And in the small kitchen of a Cold War bunker at the top of the world, 2 people who'd lost everything prepared to spend whatever time they had left giving back what others had lost. Not for money, not for recognition, but because someone had to, and they'd been chosen not by luck, but by loss, not by accident, but by adversity. They were the guardians now, and they would not fail. The charitable trust was established on a Wednesday in early November. James Morrison filed the paperwork through Canadian federal channels, establishing the Brennan Magnus Preservation Trust with Margaret and Thomas as co-trustees. The collection was now legally protected, documented, and purpose-driven. For the first time since finding the vault, they could breathe. That relief lasted exactly 4 days. The first call came on Sunday evening. Margaret was cooking dinner, Thomas reading aloud from one of Magnus's journals, when the satellite phone rang. Margaret wiped her hands and answered. "Hello? Is this the Brennan residence?" A woman's voice, professional, cold. Who's calling? My name is Victoria Lansing. I represent the International Heritage Recovery Foundation. We've been made aware of a collection of historical items in your possession. Margaret's stomach dropped. I'm sorry, who told you that? We have sources throughout the recovery community. Dr. Chen's research requests flagged our database. We understand you're attempting repatriation work. We'd like to offer assistance. We appreciate the offer, but we have representation. Mrs. Brennan, items of this historical significance require expert handling. Our foundation has resources you don't: government connections, authentication specialists, international legal teams. We'd like to send representatives to assess the collection and discuss partnership opportunities. Partnership? A percentage of recovered items would be placed in our permanent collection. We'd handle all costs, all logistics. You'd be compensated fairly for your cooperation. Margaret felt anger rising. These items aren't for sale. They belong to families. Of course, but some items have no living heirs. Those pieces could serve education, preservation, the greater good. We simply want to discuss options. May we visit? No, thank you for your interest, but we're not looking for partners. Mrs. Brennan, I strongly encourage you to reconsider. Items like these, without proper institutional support, they're vulnerable to theft, to damage, to legal complications. Our foundation could protect you. I said no. Margaret hung up, hands shaking. Thomas was already on his feet. Who was that? Some foundation. They know about the collection. They want to come here, assess it, take pieces for their museum. How did they find out? Margaret's mind raced. Dr. Chen's research. She's been contacting museums, registries, databases. Someone saw the patterns, the questions, put it together. Thomas grabbed his laptop, pulled up the International Heritage Recovery Foundation's website. It looked legitimate. Fancy headquarters in Geneva. Board of directors with impressive credentials. Mission statement about preserving cultural patrimony. They look real, Thomas said. So did Richard's investment statements. They called James Morrison immediately, despite the late hour. James, we got a call. Someone claiming to represent a heritage foundation. They knew about the collection, wanted to visit, talk about partnerships. James was quiet for a moment. What's the foundation's name? International Heritage Recovery Foundation. Hang on, typing sounds. Then a long exhale. Okay, IHRF is real. They're legitimate in the sense that they're a registered non-profit, but their reputation is complicated. They've been accused of aggressive acquisition tactics, pressuring private collectors. Sometimes their recovered items end up sold at auction instead of returned to families. So they're vultures, Margaret said. Legally operating vultures, yes. Here's what concerns me. If they know about your collection, others will too. The recovery world is small. Information travels. You need to be prepared for more contact. Some legitimate, some not. What do we do? Document everything. Record all calls if you can. Don't agree to anything. And Margaret, Thomas, I need to be very clear about something. You're sitting on nearly $300 million in art and artifacts in one of the most remote locations on Earth. That makes you a target, not just for opportunistic foundations, but for people who might not ask permission. Margaret felt cold that had nothing to do with the Arctic. You think we're in danger? I think you need to be careful, very careful. That night, they didn't sleep well. Every sound seemed amplified. Wind against the walls, ice shifting, the building settling. Margaret kept thinking about the vault 200 feet below them. All those treasures, all those stories, all that temptation for anyone willing to take it. The second contact came via email 2 days later. Margaret almost deleted it as spam, but something made her open it. Dear Mrs. Brennan, my name is Marcus Holloway. I'm a private acquisitions consultant representing several high-net-worth clients interested in rare art and historical pieces. I understand you've recently come into possession of a significant collection. My clients are prepared to make extremely generous offers for certain items, particularly those in the European Renaissance category. Discretion is guaranteed. Please contact me at your earliest convenience to discuss terms. Regards, Marcus Holloway. Margaret showed Thomas. What do we even say to this? Nothing. We say nothing. Thomas deleted the email. If we respond, we confirm the collection exists. We stay silent. But the emails kept coming. 3 more that week, then phone calls, people claiming to represent museums, private collectors, investment groups. Everyone wanted the same thing, access to the collection. Everyone promised discretion, fairness, mutual benefit. Margaret stopped answering the satellite phone unless she recognized the number. Then came the call that made everything worse. It was Dr. Chen, and her voice was tight with concern. Margaret, we have a problem. Someone's been impersonating me. What? I got a call from a curator in Amsterdam, said I'd contacted him asking about authentication services for a major Cold War-era collection. I never made that call. Someone's using my name, my credentials, fishing for information about your items. Margaret felt sick. Who would do that? People trying to verify the collection's real, trying to figure out what you have and where it is. Margaret, you need to be extremely careful about what information you share, even with me. Assume all communications could be monitored. You think our phones are tapped? I think satellite communications are easier to intercept than people realize. From now on, we use encrypted email only. I'm sending you a link to a secure server. After that call, paranoia set in. Thomas started checking the perimeter every morning, looking for signs of intrusion. Margaret began keeping the vault locked even when they were in the building. They installed additional cameras Jack had brought on his monthly supply run. You two getting jumpy? Jack asked, unloading fuel drums. We've been getting strange calls, Thomas said. Jack nodded knowingly. Word's out about something up here, isn't it? What have you heard? Chatter on the pilot networks. Someone's asking questions about flights to remote stations, offering money for information about cargo, passengers. I didn't say nothing, but others might. Jack, we need you to keep this quiet. Can you do that? The old pilot studied them. I've been flying in and out of here since your uncle's time. I know Magnus was protecting something important. I figure you're doing the same. My lips are sealed, but you should know, you're not the only ones interested in this location anymore. Had a call last week from some outfit in Vancouver. Wanted to charter a flight up here. Claimed they were researchers. What did you say? Told them I was booked solid through spring, but they were persistent, offered triple my normal rate. Margaret and Thomas exchanged looks. If anyone else asks, Thomas said, tell them the station's been decommissioned. No one here. You got it. Jack lowered his voice. But Thomas, Margaret, if you're sitting on something valuable, you might want to think about security beyond locks and cameras. This far north helps a long way away. After Jack left, they held a crisis meeting at the kitchen table. We need to accelerate the returns, Margaret said. Get as many items back to rightful owners as quickly as possible. The less we have here, the less reason anyone has to come after us. Agreed, but we also need protection, physical security. We're 70 and 67 years old, Thomas. What are we going to do? Fight off armed intruders? No, but we can make this place harder to access. The doors are already military grade. We reinforce them, add additional locks, maybe set up early warning systems. Thomas, if someone really wants to get in here, they will. Then we make sure the world knows about the collection before they do. We document everything publicly, establish provenance. If the items are known, tracked, registered, they're worthless on the black market. Margaret nodded slowly. Transparency as protection. Exactly. They spent the next week in a frenzy of activity. Margaret worked with Dr. Chen and James Morrison to upload sanitized inventory lists to international art databases. Not locations, not full details, but enough to establish the items existed and were in the process of proper repatriation. Thomas reinforced the facility's security. Additional cameras, motion sensors around the perimeter. He even rigged a simple alarm system using old radio equipment he found in Magnus's workshop. And they pushed harder on returns, working 18-hour days, researching, verifying, contacting families. In 2 weeks, they arranged 4 more repatriations: a Torah scroll to a synagogue in Montreal, a collection of letters to a Vietnamese family in California, a set of paintings to an Argentinian museum, a medal collection to a Polish war veteran's grandson. Each return felt like a victory. Each item gone was one less thing to protect, but the pressure kept building. On December 3rd, they received a formal letter via courier. Margaret recognized the law firm's name immediately. It was Richard's attorneys. The letter was brief and brutal. Regarding the estate of Margaret and Thomas Brennan, our client, Richard Brennan, hereby asserts claim to any and all assets acquired subsequent to the embezzlement case currently under investigation. Furthermore, we demand full accounting of recent financial activities, including but not limited to international shipping, satellite communications, and undisclosed income sources. Failure to comply will result in legal action to freeze assets and compel disclosure. You have 14 days to respond. Margaret read it 3 times, each time feeling more furious. He stole everything from us, and now he wants to steal this too. Thomas took the letter, hands clenching. He doesn't know what we have. This is a fishing expedition. His lawyers heard we've been active, figured we came into money somehow. James said the trust protects us. From creditor claims, yes, but Richard's arguing as an heir, not a creditor, and his lawyers are smart. They're not claiming the items, they're claiming the right to know about them, to verify we're not hiding assets that could be liquidated to pay back what he stole. Margaret felt trapped. If they disclosed the collection to Richard's lawyers, word would spread. The exact location, the full inventory, every wolf circling would descend at once. But if they didn't respond, they'd be in contempt, could face court orders, forced disclosure anyway. We fight it, she said. We let James handle it. That's what we're paying him for. James's response was measured but firm. I can delay this. File motions. Challenge jurisdiction since you're in Canada and Richard's case is in the US, but eventually some disclosure will be required. The question is what and when. I recommend we get ahead of it. How? Go public. Controlled release. You tell your story before they can. The collection, the repatriation mission, your uncle's legacy. You frame this as humanitarian work, not hidden assets. You show the world you're the good guys. Won't that make us more of a target? Possibly, but it also makes you harder to attack. Thieves prefer shadows. You bring this into the light, suddenly there are witnesses, reporters, public interest. It's not foolproof, but it's better than waiting for Richard's lawyers to control the narrative. Margaret looked at Thomas. What do you think? I think hiding hasn't worked. Someone already leaked information. Multiple people know something's up here. Maybe James is right. Maybe we go public on our terms. 3 days later, Margaret sat in front of their laptop camera, Thomas beside her, and recorded a 10-minute video. She told their story simply. Their careers as teachers, Richard's betrayal, the inheritance from Thomas's uncle, the discovery of the vault, the mission to return lost treasures to rightful families. She showed photos of items already returned. Dimitri with his mother's brooch, the Vietnamese professor with her father's research, the Polish grandson with his grandfather's medals. We're not doing this for money, Margaret said to the camera. We're doing this because it's right, because these items carry stories bigger than their value, because families deserve to have back what was taken from them by war, by persecution, by loss. We're asking for privacy to continue this work. And we're asking anyone with information about these items or their owners to come forward. This isn't about us. It's about the thousands of people who trusted someone to keep their treasures safe. We're just honoring that trust. They uploaded the video to YouTube with a simple title: The Arctic Vault, Returning Treasures to Their Families. Within 24 hours, it had 12,000 views. Within 48 hours, 63,000. By day 3, it was trending. News outlets picked it up: the Associated Press, BBC, CBC. Suddenly, Margaret and Thomas Brennan weren't anonymous retirees hiding in the Arctic. They were international news. The story resonated. Elderly couple betrayed by their son finds treasure and gives it away. Human interest gold. Reporters requested interviews. Magazines wanted features. Even a documentary filmmaker reached out. Dr. Chen called, excited. "Margaret, this is brilliant. I've gotten contact from 7 families who think items in your collection might be theirs. The exposure is working." But James Morrison sounded worried. "You've made yourself very visible. That comes with risks." "We know. But hiding wasn't working either. Just be careful. Fame attracts more than families looking for lost heirlooms." He was right. The first direct threat came via email 48 hours after the video went viral. No name. Anonymous server. "You're sitting on property that doesn't belong to you. Return it to proper authorities or face consequences. You have 1 week." Thomas reported it to RCMP. They took the report, but were frank about limitations. "You're in one of the most remote locations in Canada. Our nearest detachment is 400 miles south. We can investigate the threat, but protecting you in real time is nearly impossible." "So what do we do?" The constable was sympathetic but realistic. "Document everything. Stay alert. Consider whether the risk of staying there is worth it." Margaret refused to even discuss leaving. "We're not abandoning this. People are counting on us." But the threats kept coming. Anonymous calls on the satellite phone, emails, even a letter delivered via Jack's supply run, though Jack swore he didn't know who'd given it to him. The content was always similar: demands to hand over the collection to various organizations, warnings about consequences if they didn't comply, accusations of theft, hoarding, illegal possession. Thomas started sleeping with a rifle beside the bed. Not that he'd ever shot anyone, but the weight of it was comforting. Then came the night everything changed. It was December 18th. A storm had been building all day, wind speeds approaching 70 miles per hour, visibility near zero. Margaret was in the kitchen preparing dinner when every light in the facility went out. Complete darkness. Thomas fumbled for his flashlight. "Generator. Must have failed. I'll check it." But when Thomas reached the generator room, he found something that stopped him cold. The fuel line had been cut, not broken, cut, cleanly severed with a blade. "Margaret!" His voice echoed through the facility. "Someone's been inside." She appeared behind him, flashlight beam shaking. "That's impossible. All the doors were locked." They searched the facility room by room, hearts pounding. Nothing seemed disturbed, nothing stolen. But in the entrance hall, they found what they'd missed before. Snow tracked in, footprints, small, already melting. Someone had been inside. Recently. Thomas checked the external cameras, running on backup battery. He rewound the footage. There. 3 figures in Arctic gear approaching the building during the storm's peak. They'd disabled the perimeter sensors first, then picked the outer door lock with professional efficiency. They'd been inside for 12 minutes. Hadn't touched the vault, hadn't taken anything visible. Just moved through the facility like they were casing it. The footage showed them leaving, but not before one turned back toward the camera. Even through the storm and distance, the message was clear. "We can get in whenever we want." Margaret watched the footage 3 times, each viewing making her more afraid. Who were they? Professionals. The way they moved, the tools they used, these weren't amateurs. What did they want? Information, layout of the building, security measures. They're planning something. Thomas backed up the footage to multiple drives, sent copies to James and the RCMP. Then he did something Margaret had never seen him do in 42 years of marriage. He cried, not loud sobs, just silent tears running down his weathered face as he stared at the screen showing strangers violating their home. "We can't protect this," he said quietly. "We're two old people in the middle of nowhere. If they come back with force, we can't stop them." Margaret felt her own tears starting. He was right. They both knew it. All their security measures, all their precautions, they were theatre. If someone wanted the collection badly enough, they'd take it. "So what do we do?" she whispered. Thomas wiped his eyes, looked at her with an expression she'd seen before, the same look he'd had when they decided to come north in the first place. Determination edged with desperation. "We finish this. We work faster. We get as many items returned as humanly possible before whoever that was comes back. And we tell the world exactly what we're doing. Every return, every family reunited. We make this mission so public, so documented, that if something happens to us, others will carry it forward. Thomas, they could hurt us." "I know, but we can't run. We already lost everything once. Our home, our savings, our son. If we lose this mission too, what do we have left?" Margaret thought about Dmitry Petrov and his mother's butterfly brooch, about the Vietnamese professor clutching her father's research, about the families still waiting for items they didn't even know had survived. "We have purpose," she said softly. "We have meaning." "Exactly. So we keep going, scared or not." They repaired the fuel line, restarted the generator, then they stayed up all night working in the vault, photographing items, scanning Magnus's notes, uploading everything to secure servers. If something happened to them, at least the information would survive. By dawn, they'd documented 87 more items. By the end of the next week, they'd completed the full inventory, 347 items, every single one photographed, catalogued, and backed up to servers in 3 countries. Dr. Chen coordinated with international databases. James Morrison filed legal documents establishing the Trust's permanent archive. They created a website showing the collection, the mission, the returns already made, and the items still seeking rightful owners. Within days, the response was overwhelming. Emails from around the world, people claiming connections to items, historians offering research help, museums volunteering authentication services. The recovery community rallied, but so did the wolves. The calls increased, more aggressive, more specific, people naming exact items, demanding to know if Margaret and Thomas had them, offering money, making threats, some claiming to represent original owners, though their documentation was clearly forged. On December 23rd, Thomas was outside checking the perimeter sensors when he noticed something on the horizon, a dark speck against the white. He grabbed binoculars. Helicopter, black, no markings, heading directly toward them. He ran inside. "Margaret, we have incoming. Helicopter." They watched from the window as it circled once, twice, then landed 100 yards from the main entrance. 3 people emerged, 2 men in tactical gear, 1 woman in an expensive parka. The woman approached the door alone, knocked firmly. Margaret and Thomas looked at each other. They could ignore it, pretend no one was home. But the helicopter had clearly seen their lights, their vehicle, the smoke from their generator exhaust. Thomas opened the door, keeping the chain lock engaged. The woman smiled. Professional, cold. "Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, my name is Elizabeth Hartford. I represent a consortium of private collectors. We'd like to discuss a business proposition." "We're not interested in business propositions," Thomas said. "I think you'll want to hear this one. May I come in?" "No. Say what you came to say." Elizabeth's smile didn't waver. "Very well. My clients are prepared to offer $15 million for your collection. Full amount. Cash transfer. You sign over rights, walk away, enjoy your retirement somewhere warm and safe. The collection isn't for sale." "Mr. Brennan, be reasonable. You're two elderly people sitting on nearly $300 million in art. You can't possibly authenticate and return every piece. You lack resources, expertise, time. We're offering you a clean exit. We're offering you a clean exit, Margaret said sharply. Leave our property. Elizabeth's expression hardened. I'm trying to help you. There are people interested in this collection who won't be so polite, who won't offer money, who'll simply take what they want. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. You're vulnerable here, isolated. The Canadian government can't protect you. Local law enforcement is hours away. You made yourselves famous with that video. Now everyone knows where you are and what you have. It's only a matter of time before someone decides to stop asking permission. Thomas stepped forward, despite Margaret's hand on his arm. You tell your clients and anyone else interested that this collection belongs to the families who entrusted it to my uncle. We will return every single item to its rightful owner or die trying. Now get off our property. Elizabeth studied them both. Then she shrugged. Your choice. But when things go badly, and they will, remember you had a chance to walk away. She returned to the helicopter. Within moments they were gone. Margaret was shaking. That was a threat. A direct threat. I know. Thomas, maybe we should contact the RCMP, get protection. And tell them what? Someone offered us money and we said no? Made vague warnings? There's nothing illegal about what just happened. So we just wait for them to come back. Thomas turned to her, taking both her hands. No, we accelerate everything. We contact every family we've identified. We arrange emergency returns. We empty this vault as fast as humanly possible. The less we have, the less they can take. Over the next 72 hours, they worked like people possessed. Dr. Chen coordinated a network of volunteers, lawyers, researchers, curators, authenticators. They formed a virtual assembly line, verifying ownership claims, arranging logistics, processing returns. On Christmas Eve, they returned 6 items to 5 families across 3 continents. On Christmas Day, they worked through dinner, making calls, sending emails, scanning documents. By New Year's Eve, they'd successfully returned or transferred 32 additional items. The vault that had held 347 now held 298. But every return required shipping information, addresses, courier services, each one a potential leak to anyone watching. And someone was definitely watching. The second intrusion happened on January 4th. Thomas woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of metal scraping. He grabbed the rifle and flashlight, moving silently through the facility. In the lower level, he found 2 men in tactical gear attempting to cut through the vault's exterior door with a plasma torch. "Stop!" Thomas shouted, rifle raised. The men turned. One reached for a weapon. Thomas fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The crack of the rifle in the enclosed space was deafening. The men ran. Thomas chased them to the outer door, watched them sprint toward a snowmobile hidden behind an ice ridge. By the time he could have followed, they were gone. Margaret appeared, still in her nightgown, holding their satellite phone. "I called the RCMP. They're dispatching officers, but it'll be 12 hours minimum." Thomas was breathing hard, adrenaline making his hands shake. They were cutting into the vault. Another few minutes and they'd have been through. "We can't keep doing this. We can't fight them off every time." "I know." When the RCMP officers finally arrived the next afternoon, they surveyed the damage and took statements. But their assessment was grim. "You need to consider evacuation," the senior constable said. "What you're describing is escalating. Attempted burglary, armed intrusion. These people are getting bolder." "We can't leave," Margaret said. "We have work to finish." "Mrs. Brennan, your work won't matter if you're dead." The words hung in the cold air. That night, Margaret and Thomas sat in Magnus's study, surrounded by journals and photographs of a man who'd dedicated 30 years to protecting things that didn't belong to him. "He died here," Margaret said quietly. Alone, protecting this. We don't have to, Thomas replied. We could leave, set up the trust remotely, coordinate returns from somewhere safe. Margaret looked at the photographs on the wall. Magnus young and confident, Magnus middle-aged and determined, Magnus old and weary but still working. No, she said. We finish this here, where it started. We owe him that. We owe all those families that. Thomas nodded slowly. Then we fortify, we prepare, and we work faster than they can move. Because they both knew the truth. The wolves were circling. And soon, very soon, they'd stop circling and attack. The only question was whether Margaret and Thomas could finish their mission before the pack descended. Outside, the Arctic night stretched endless and cold. Inside the vault, treasures waited in silence. And in the small kitchen of a Cold War bunker, two people who'd lost everything prepared to defend what mattered most. Not wealth, not security, but the simple promise that some things are worth protecting, that some missions are worth completing, that some people still keep their word. Even when the wolves are at the door. The attack came on January 9th, 3 a.m. during the worst storm of the winter. Wind screaming at 90 miles per hour, temperature 42 below, visibility 0. The perfect cover. Margaret woke to the sound of their alarm system blaring, not the perimeter sensors, those had been disabled. This was the internal motion detector Thomas had rigged to the vault entrance. Someone was inside the facility. Thomas was already moving, grabbing the rifle, pulling on his parka over his pajamas. Margaret reached for the satellite phone, but the line was dead. Cut or jammed, didn't matter which. Stay here, Thomas whispered. Lock the bedroom door. Absolutely not. We're in this together. They moved through the darkened hallway, flashlights cutting through shadows. Thomas had killed the main power, running only emergency lights, made them harder to track. Voices echoed from below, multiple people, professional, coordinated. Vaults sealed, one said. We need the codes. Forget codes. Set charges. Blow it. Thomas and Margaret exchanged looks. Explosives. These people weren't here to negotiate. Thomas cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, This is private property. The RCMP has been notified. You're trespassing on a federal trust. Leave now. Laughter echoed back. Old man, the RCMP is 12 hours away in good weather. In this storm, days. You're alone. Give us access to the vault and we'll leave you unharmed. Resist and people get hurt. Margaret gripped Thomas's arm. What do we do? He thought fast. The vault's door was military grade, would take them time to breach. But they had time. All the time in the world in this storm. Help couldn't arrive. No helicopters could fly. No one could reach them. Unless... The emergency beacon, Thomas whispered. Magnus's old military distress signal. Its hardwired independent system. Will anyone respond? The Canadian forces monitor those frequencies. It's our only shot. While Thomas kept the rifle trained on the stairwell, Margaret crawled on her belly through the hallways to Magnus's old communications room. Her hands shook as she found the beacon, a relic from the Cold War designed to survive EMP blasts and nuclear winter. She flipped the cover, pressed the activation sequence. A red light began blinking. Somewhere, hundreds of miles away, a signal was transmitting. Whether anyone would respond, she had no idea. She crawled back to Thomas. It's active. Good, now we stall. Thomas called down the stairs. The vault's on a time lock, can't be opened until 0800. You can blow it, but you'll damage everything inside. Paintings, documents, all that value destroyed. A pause. Consultation. Then a different voice, cultured, educated. Mr. Brennan, I'm going to come halfway up those stairs, unarmed. I just want to talk. Stay where you are. 5 minutes of conversation could save everyone considerable trouble. Thomas looked at Margaret. She nodded. We keep him talking, we buy time. Fine. Come up slowly, hands visible. A man emerged from the darkness below. Late 40s, expensive cold weather gear, the kind of face that belonged in boardrooms, not breaking into Arctic facilities. He stopped on the landing, hands raised. "My name is Alexander Petrov. I represent a consortium of international collectors." Margaret's breath caught. "Petrov. Are you related to Dmitri Petrov, Anastasia's son?" Alexander smiled coldly, distantly. Fourth cousins, perhaps. When dear Dmitri posted about his miraculous butterfly brooch on social media, thanking the kind American couple who'd returned his mother's treasure, certain people took notice. We realized Magnus Brennan's long-rumored vault was real and that you had access. So you came to steal it. Steal is such an ugly word. We came to acquire items that rightfully belong in private collections, items wasted on peasants who can't appreciate their value. Thomas's finger tightened on the trigger. Those items belong to families, people who lost everything. People who are dead, Alexander said dismissively, or whose descendants wouldn't know a Rembrandt from a paint by numbers. We're offering fair market value, 15 million. You walk away rich. We acquire pieces that will be properly preserved, appreciated by those with taste and wealth. No, Margaret said simply. Alexander's expression hardened. Then I'm afraid we'll have to take them. We have explosives, we have time, and we have no compunctions about leaving you in the rubble. So I'll ask once more. Open the vault. No, Alexander shrugged. So be it. Gentlemen, proceed with the charges. He descended the stairs. Margaret and Thomas heard sounds of activity below, metal clanking, equipment being positioned. How long before they can blow it? Margaret whispered. 30 minutes to set charges properly, maybe less. And how long before help arrives? I don't know, maybe never. They retreated to a defensive position. Magnus's study, which had a reinforced door and its own lock. They barricaded themselves inside, pushing the heavy desk against the door. Thomas checked the rifle. 12 rounds. Margaret inventoried their supplies. 2 bottles of water, some granola bars Thomas had left on the desk. Their phones, useless without signal. If they get through that door, Thomas said quietly, you run. Take the service tunnel to the garage, snowmobiles fueled, you drive south and don't stop. I'm not leaving you. Margaret, 42 years, Thomas. I didn't stay this long to run when things get hard. He looked at her, really looked at her, this woman who'd stood beside him through student loans and sick parents and their son's betrayal, who'd followed him into the Arctic on nothing but faith, who'd turned their greatest loss into their greatest purpose. I love you, he said. I love you too. Now let's figure out how to survive this. The explosion, when it came, shook the entire facility. Dust rained from the ceiling. Alarms blared. Margaret grabbed Thomas's hand, squeezing tight. They heard shouts below, then silence. Then footsteps approaching the study. Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, Alexander called. The vault's open. We're collecting what we came for. You can stay locked in there. We'll be gone in an hour. No one needs to get hurt. Margaret's eyes burned with tears of rage and helplessness. All that work, all those families waiting. Treasures that had been protected for 50 years, now being looted by men who saw only dollar signs. Then, cutting through the storm's howl, a new sound, deep, rhythmic, mechanical, helicopter rotors. Not one, multiple. Thomas rushed to the window, wiping frost from the glass. Through the swirling snow, he saw lights, red and white, military grade. Canadian forces, he breathed. They came. The helicopters circled, searchlights cutting through the storm. Loudspeakers boomed. This is the Canadian Armed Forces. You are in violation of federal airspace and trespassing on protected property. Exit the building with your hands visible or we will enter with force. More sounds below. Confused shouting, someone yelling about abort, footsteps running. Thomas and Margaret emerged from the study cautiously. They descended to find the vault level abandoned. The vault door hung twisted on its hinges, smoke still rising from the breached seal. Inside, they could see items disturbed, crates opened, but nothing appeared to be missing. The intruders had fled at the first sound of military helicopters. Soldiers in winter combat gear swept through the facility, weapons ready, securing each room. A lieutenant found Thomas and Margaret huddled together near the vault. "Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, you're safe now. We have 4 suspects in custody outside. The others fled on snowmobiles, but they won't get far in this storm." Margaret started crying, not delicate tears, but great heaving sobs of relief and exhaustion and overwhelming emotion. Thomas held her, his own eyes wet. The lieutenant gave them space, then said gently, "The emergency beacon. Haven't seen one of those activated in 20 years. Lucky for you, we take them seriously. Scrambled 2 Chinooks from Cold Lake the moment the signal came through." "Thank you," Thomas managed. "Thank you." The next hours blurred together. Medics checked them over. Investigators took statements. The vault was sealed again, this time with military guards posted. By dawn, the storm had passed, and with it came more helicopters, RCMP investigators, federal prosecutors, forensic teams, and journalists. Somehow, word had gotten out. Elderly couple in Arctic defended treasure vault from armed thieves. The story was irresistible. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived on the second day, flown in by military transport. She embraced Margaret at the door. "I came as soon as I heard. Are you both all right?" "We're alive," Margaret said. "That's something." Dr. Chen walked through the facility, saw the damaged vault door, the disturbed items, the evidence of intrusion. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. Margaret, Thomas, you can't stay here anymore. It's too dangerous." "We have work to finish," Margaret said stubbornly. "Then we finish it somewhere else, somewhere safe." James Morrison arrived the next day with a plan. The Canadian government wants to help. After what happened, there's political will to support your mission. They're offering to move the collection to a secure facility in Ottawa. Government protection, full authentication resources. You'd work under official supervision, but you'd maintain control as trustees. Thomas looked at Margaret. They both looked around the facility that had been their home for 3 months. Magnus's legacy, their refuge, their purpose. "Can we finish the mission from Ottawa?" Margaret asked. "You can finish it faster, better, safer," James said. "Then we go." The transfer took 2 weeks. Military helicopters shuttled items from the vault to transport planes. Each piece was documented, photographed, packed with museum-quality care. Dr. Chen supervised every step, ensuring nothing was damaged or lost. Margaret walked through the emptying vault one last time. All those treasures Magnus had guarded for 30 years, now being moved to safety, to proper care. She stood in the center of the carved ice chamber, listening to the silence. "We did it," she whispered. "We protected them." Thomas appeared beside her. "No, we're doing better than that. We're setting them free." In Ottawa, they were given offices in the National Archives building, secure storage for the collection, a team of researchers, authenticators, and legal experts. It was overwhelming and wonderful, and nothing like the quiet isolation of the Arctic. But it was effective. With proper resources, the work accelerated dramatically. Items that would have taken Margaret and Thomas months to research and verify were completed in days. The team Dr. Chen assembled was passionate, dedicated, and above all, ethical. No one was there to acquire, everyone was there to return. The returns began in earnest in March, a ceremonial event at the archives to present a collection of Holocaust-era artifacts to surviving families. Margaret stood beside an elderly woman who clutched a photograph of her parents, both killed at Auschwitz. The woman held her mother's necklace, thought lost forever, and wept. "My mother wore this the day they took her," the woman said. "I was 5. I watched them lead her away. I never thought I'd touch something she loved. Thank you. Thank you." Margaret couldn't speak, just held the woman's hand and cried with her. In April, they returned a collection of Vietnamese cultural items to a museum in Hanoi. The ceremony was broadcast nationally. The museum director spoke of cultural heritage saved from the war, of connections to the past preserved by one man's dedication and one couple's determination. In May, a family from Argentina received their grandfather's writings, journals, and letters from the dirty war. The grandson read aloud from his grandfather's words, descriptions of hope and resistance written while in hiding. "He died before I was born," the grandson said. "These words are all I have of him. You've given me my grandfather." With each return, the collection shrank. The vault that had held 347 items now held 212, then 183, then 146. And with each return, Margaret and Thomas felt lighter, like they were shedding weight they hadn't known they carried. Grief, guilt, the burden of their son's betrayal. It didn't erase those wounds, but it transformed them into something useful, something meaningful. In June, the legal case against Richard reached its conclusion. The extradition from Singapore, the charges, the trial. Margaret and Thomas attended via video link, watching their son stand before a judge and plead guilty to 23 counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. The prosecutor asked if the victims wished to speak. Margaret declined at first, but Thomas gently encouraged her. "You need to say what you need to say." So Margaret addressed the court, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. "My son took our money. $380,000 we saved over 40 years. He took our security, our trust, our peace. But what he gave us, inadvertently, was purpose. We were forced north into the Arctic. We discovered a collection of lost treasures, and we've spent the last 6 months returning those treasures to people who'd lost everything, families who thought their heritage was gone forever. We've given them back pieces of their history, their identity, their loved ones' memories. So, Richard, you meant to destroy us. But instead, you led us to the most important work of our lives. I don't forgive you. I don't think I ever will. But I thank you for showing me who I really am. I'm stronger than I thought, kinder than you deserved, and better than you'll ever be." She disconnected the call before Richard could respond. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. Restitution was ordered, though everyone knew the money was gone. Thomas and Margaret received formal apologies from the banks, the regulators, everyone who'd failed to catch Richard's scheme earlier. It was closure of a sort, not satisfying, not healing, but final. By August, the collection held only 68 items, the hardest cases, items with no clear provenance, no living heirs found despite exhaustive research, pieces that might never find their rightful homes. The team debated what to do with them. Some suggested a museum, others a permanent memorial. Dr. Chen advocated for continued research, believing eventually all mysteries could be solved. Margaret had a different idea. "We create a fund, sell the items that truly have no heirs, but only after every possible avenue is exhausted. Use the money to help other families searching for lost heritage, to support researchers, to fund repatriation work around the world. Make these last pieces serve the same purpose the others did, reuniting people with what they've lost." The team agreed. James Morrison established the Magnus Brennan Heritage Recovery Fund. The first auction, carefully managed and ethically conducted, raised $8.7 million. The money went to programs helping refugees locate family heirlooms, supporting Holocaust researchers, funding indigenous artifact repatriation. It was Magnus's legacy multiplied, reaching far beyond what he could have imagined. In September, on what would have been Magnus's 92nd birthday, Margaret and Thomas stood in a small ceremony dedicating a memorial in the National Archives, a plaque reading Magnus Brennan, 1932 to 2023, guardian of lost treasures, keeper of promises. He protected what others abandoned, honored what others forgot. In his memory, we continue the work. Beneath the plaque was a single item, the last piece Magnus had catalogued before his death, a simple pocket watch, inscription worn smooth, unknown origin, no heirs found. It would remain there, a symbol of all the stories still waiting to be told. Reporters asked Margaret how it felt to have completed such an enormous task. "We haven't completed it," she said. "There are still items searching for homes, still families searching for treasures. We've just proven it's possible, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things if they care enough. What's next for you both?" Margaret looked at Thomas. They'd talked about this, their future, what came after the mission that had consumed their lives. "We're staying in Ottawa," Thomas said, "working with the Heritage Fund, teaching classes on research methodology, helping other people learn to trace lost items. And," Margaret added with a small smile, "we're writing Magnus's story, so people understand what he did, what he sacrificed, 30 years alone in the Arctic, protecting things he could never claim. That kind of integrity deserves to be remembered." The interview ended. The journalists packed up. Margaret and Thomas walked through the archives to their small office, still filled with files, still humming with purpose. "Do you ever think about the Arctic?" Thomas asked. "Every day. Do you?" "Every day. Part of me misses it, the quiet, the simplicity." Margaret nodded. "But another part of me knows we needed to leave. We needed help. We needed community. Magnus tried to do it alone and it killed him. We're not Magnus. No, we're better, because we learned what he never did, that some burdens are meant to be shared." That night, in their small apartment near the archives, Margaret sat at her laptop and opened an email. It was from Dmitry Petrov, the first family they'd helped. He sent updates occasionally, pictures of his children learning about their heritage, studying the butterfly brooch, asking questions about their great-grandmother Anastasia. This email included a photo. Dmitry's eldest daughter, maybe 13, wearing the butterfly brooch and smiling. The caption read, "She wants to be a historian now, wants to help other families find their lost treasures. You inspired her. You inspired all of us. Thank you for not giving up." Margaret showed Thomas. They looked at the photo for a long time. "We changed her life," Thomas said quietly. "No," Margaret replied. "We gave her family back their story. She's changing her own life." 347 items. 296 successfully returned to families, 38 placed in museums with full provenance, 13 sold with proceeds funding ongoing research, the last 8 still under investigation, still searching for their rightful homes. But more than items returned, lives touched, families healed, connections restored. A network of researchers and advocates formed around the world, all inspired by one couple's refusal to give up. Margaret and Thomas had started this journey broken, betrayed by their son, stripped of everything they'd worked for, forced into exile in one of the harshest places on earth. They'd found a vault full of treasures and realized the real treasure wasn't the items themselves. It was the opportunity to be part of something larger than their own pain, to transform loss into purpose, betrayal into mission, isolation into community. Did it heal the wound of Richard's betrayal? No. That scar would always remain. They'd probably never speak to their son again. That relationship was dead, mourned, buried, but they'd built something in its place. Not a replacement son, but a legacy. Hundreds of people across the world who knew the Brennan name not as victims, but as guardians, as people who kept promises, who honored trust, who did what was right even when it was hard. 1 year after discovering the vault, Margaret stood in front of a classroom of graduate students studying cultural heritage preservation. She told them about Magnus, about the vault, about the mission, about the choices they'd made and the people they'd helped. A student raised her hand. "Weren't you angry at your son, at the situation? Didn't you want revenge?" Margaret considered the question. Yes, I was furious. Some days I still am, but I learned something in the Arctic. Anger is heavy. Revenge is heavier. Purpose is what makes you light enough to keep going. Another student asked, "Would you do it again, knowing how hard it would be?" Margaret didn't hesitate. Every single day, because the alternative was staying in Montana, watching our house get foreclosed, living on Social Security, being defined by what our son stole from us. Instead, we're defined by what we gave back, to families, to history, to ourselves. After the class, Margaret and Thomas walked through Ottawa's streets. It was November now, cold, but nothing like the Arctic. They passed cafes and shops and normal people living normal lives. "Do you think we're normal again?" Thomas asked. Margaret laughed. "We guarded $295 million in treasure beneath Arctic ice and fought off armed thieves. I don't think we'll ever be normal again." "Good. Normal's overrated anyway." They stopped at their favorite coffee shop, ordered the same drinks they always did, sat in the same corner booth. But they weren't the same people who'd left Montana a year ago. They were stronger, wiser, purposeful. They'd stared into the abyss of betrayal and loss and chosen to build instead of break, to give instead of take, to trust instead of hide. And in doing so, they'd discovered something profound. That the greatest treasures aren't found in vaults or measured in dollars. They're found in the moment a grandmother touches her mother's necklace, in the tears of a man reading his grandfather's words, in the smile of a girl learning her family's story. Margaret and Thomas Brennan had lost everything, and in losing everything, they'd found what mattered most. Not wealth, not revenge, not even justice. Purpose, meaning, the knowledge that their lives had made a difference. And really, what greater treasure could anyone hope to find? Sometimes the people who betray you give you exactly what you need to become who you were always meant to be. Not through their kindness, but through their cruelty. Not through their love, but through their abandonment. Margaret and Thomas's son had stolen their money, their security, their peace. He'd forced them into exile, into hardship, into the frozen north. And in doing so, he'd given them the greatest gift of all, the chance to matter, to serve, to transform private pain into public good. They didn't thank him, they never would, but they also didn't waste energy hating him, because they'd learned something in that vault beneath the ice, that you can't control what people take from you, you can only control what you do with what remains. And what remained for Margaret and Thomas was purpose. Mission. The kind of meaning money could never buy. As the Ottawa winter settled in, they continued their work, researching, connecting, returning, helping other people learn to trace their own lost treasures. The vault in the Arctic sat empty now, sealed and silent. But its legacy lived on in every family reunited with their heritage, in every researcher trained in ethical repatriation, in every person who learned that some promises should never be broken, even 50 years later. Magnus had started the work alone. Margaret and Thomas had carried it forward together, and now a whole community was sustaining it, expanding it, ensuring it would continue long after they were gone. That was the real treasure, not what was found, but what was built from the finding. Not the items, but the impact. Not the vault, but the values. And late at night, when Margaret couldn't sleep, she'd think about the Arctic, about standing 200 feet beneath the ice, surrounded by lost treasures, making the choice to give it all away. It was the easiest decision she'd ever made. Because some things are more valuable than money, more precious than gold, more lasting than diamonds. Integrity, purpose, the knowledge that when you had the chance to do right or do easy, you chose right, every single time. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible true stories that will move you. Click now to keep watching. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that sometimes losing everything is exactly what you need to find what truly matters.